When we arrive at a final fact, it is absurd to attempt a further explanation. What I have therefore treated of as an assumption in the concluding sentence of the last paragraph is no assumption at all, but a final fact of our nature. Our nature, as it is imperfect, or adopting the language of the text, is enshrouded in impurity, mala, anava mala. Law of universal progression or progress is another law of nature, and evolution is readily provided. And for bringing about this evolution or births, we require an omniscient and perfect Nirmala being. In the whole chain of argument, this last is the only thing assumed or inferred. But see the argument on the other side. There is one Brahm. Ishvara is generated from the Brahm. Malaprakriti is produced between them. Light or energy proceeds from Ishvara, and a particle of this light becomes evolved into a man, or an ass, or a worm. All these are assumptions pure and simple, mere hypothesis, it is admitted. Does this hypothesis stand to reason? Does it furnish us any satisfactory reasons for all this evolution from Brahm to man or brute? Mr. Subhabao, after stating that the first cause, which is omnipresent, what this really means is explained in the next argument, and eternal, is subject to periods of activity, srishti, and passivity, samharam observes. But even the real reason for this activity and passivity is unintelligible to our minds, or, as a learned Swami more explicitly and honestly puts it, why should the free, perfect, and pure being be thus under the thraldom of matter? How can the perfect soul be deluded into the belief that he is imperfect? How can the perfect become the quasi-perfect? How can the pure, the absolute, change even a microscopically small part of its nature? The answer is, I do not know. You assume that evil or impurity is produced out of good or purity, and then parade your honesty and admit that you don't know why it is so. Don't you think that the fallacy lies more in your assumption than in any real difficulty? Why should you assume that evil is produced out of good? The thing is impossible. You must take things as they are. You find good and evil together. Man is impure and weak. Is it just possible that there is a being who is pure and strong enough to lift him from the bottomless pit? And herein is the real reason, as the text says. God is active or passive as it is necessary for man to be set on the wheel of evolution or to rest. Neither will it do to assume that God created man at a particular moment and that he committed sin, and sin came into the world after the creation of man and the world. Man committed sin because he had not the understanding to see that his good lay in obeying God's words, and he had not the free knowledge or intelligence to foresee all the evil he was to bring upon the earth by his disobedient act. That is to say, he, as created, was an imperfect being. Laws are made as man is weak and erring, and we cannot impute to God the defects of a bad mechanic, want of knowledge and skill. Man's reason does not accept the other explanation, no explanation at all, merely a confession of ignorance, that God's ways are mysterious. Why say at all that God made such a bad job? We don't thereby pull him down from the position of the Creator and the Supreme Lord of the universe. In what sense he is the Creator is clearly explained in this book and is consistent with modern science. We cannot therefore say that man has an Adi being. We simply deny that and say he is Anadi, without beginning, eternal, i.e., more simply, that he exists. His existence is taken as a fact and admitting of no other explanation. So his imperfection, Anavamala, and other Malabandhas in union with him are also Anandi, eternal. And the illustrations give some very apt analogies showing such mutual relationship and union. Paddy and copper are the examples. A paddy grain appears as one, still it is composed of the husk, bran, rice, and the sprout, and all these are united together at the same time. Just as the physical covering of man completely hides his real self, so the husk may conceal the rice. There is one more thing which conceals the whiteness and purity of the rice, soul, and that is the dark bran, anava, more intimately connected with it. And then there is a sprout, karma, but for which the grain will not germinate. germinate, attain births. And what is the use of the husk? Remove it, the seed will not germinate and grow into a plant, attain bodies, and when you want to get at the rice, the real self-soul, it helps by friction, by successive births, evolution, to become the dark bran, anava, ignorance. Take copper again. We find it embedded in the bosom of rock, God. It is a darksome, ugly thing, man with his imperfections. What it is that makes it ugly dims its real luster, its rust. When did it become covered with rust? It was always so. It is not a mere covering. The rust is in its very core. Was copper soul derived from gold, God? No. Can its rust, anava, be removed, and can it become gold? We will see. Bring it into use, births, and by friction applied by the hand, or tamarind, maya, it brightens a little, becomes intelligent and active. Lay it at rest, resolution, the rust covers it again. And it is the alchemist's belief that after an innumerable number of putams, fire and friction, and when it had reached a certain kind of tone, a touch of the parasavedi, alchemist stone, will turn it at once into gold. And our belief is that after we had undergone a sufficient number of births, and we had reached Malaparibhagam, God's grace will touch and convert us into himself. The alchemist may or may not have succeeded in his lifelong hope. At least there is no harm for us if we believe that we will reach perfection, divinehood. At any rate, we are sure of reaching perfect manhood. B. The second illustration of the sun and lotus shows that God is unchangeable, nirvikari, and impartial and just. His justice and mercy are not incompatible things. Out of his supreme love, he lifts the lotus from the deep darkness of anava and puts them into the cycle of births, whereby they can obtain salvation sooner or later, according to their deserts, without any further interference on the part of God, showing us, however, the ways by which we can reach the goal. A physician can cure a man's bad sight, but if after that he carelessly falls into a pit, the physician cannot be blamed. Or again, a man has his sight, he can see with his eyes, but could he see without the light of the sun? If we see wrong, or do not carefully note the pitfalls, etc., and come to a mishap, can we blame the sun? We have our own intelligence to guide us, though the divine light surrounds us and enables us to use our intelligence. Man therefore cannot shift on his moral responsibility to God. 3. This argument removes the doubt whether death is a final ending, annihilation. The strongest point in the doctrine of this school is the principle that nothing can come out of nothing, and that no effect can be produced without a cause, following the principle of conservation that nothing which is can cease to be so. If the prapancha, body and mind, is an entity, it was established in the first sutra that it was produced out of some primordial substance. It could not therefore cease to exist when it undergoes ordinary deaths. Deaths must necessarily therefore lead to rebirths. So it is laid down that births and deaths are possible only when a thing is eternal. But what is that in it which brings about births and deaths? It is the law of change, continual change, evolution. This eternal and continually changing ego, undergoing births and rebirths, should not be confounded with the vaguely apprehended and feebly postulated ego of the southern Buddhists, a mere product of the skandhas, eking out some kind of continued existence, failing when the skandhas fail, and becoming annihilated also. We postulate also nirvana, and the word is used in such conjunctions as nirvana diksha, etc., but in what sense they are used will be shown later on. It does not mean annihilation. A and B. The illustrations explain how the soul and its inseparable and eternal body undergo birth, death, and rebirth. Man's visible body, sthula sarira, is only resolved into its cause, sukshuma sarira, as water passes into invisible vapor. So the soul, passing from its sthula sarira to its sukshuma sarira, as illustrated in B, experiences some pleasure or pain, as in sleep, the death of every day, nitya pralaya. The man experiences pleasant or unpleasant dreams, according to his experience of the previous day or days. When the soul had therefore eaten of its karma in part, and had received received sufficient rest, its akamya karma induces it again to get a sthula sarira. Heaven or hell are merely states or condition of the soul's existence in shukshuma sarira. These have no local or space existence. When the soul is in its sthula sarira, the faculties are active and receive full play. In its sukshuma state, all the faculties are paralyzed and inactive, though it is capable of certain experiences owing to the past experiences vaguely reproducing themselves. The dream condition is exactly its parallel. We don't remember all our days, experiences in sleep or dream. Nor do we remember the numberless dreams in a night when we wake up unless it be very vivid or strong. Even when we are awake, we do not remember all our past actions, though sometimes they be a day old. Man is therefore not able to remember his life in a previous state or birth, through the changes in his mental and physical conditions and through his feeble powers of retentiveness. For it was already shown how God was in Advaita relation with the world, and this is not possible but for his Chit Shakti, and the relation of himself to the Shakti is described as a Samavaya relation. This inseparable association is one and the same thing, but we can regard the one in two different aspects. When we regard God in himself apart from the world, he is Shivam, pure Sat. When we regard him in relation with the world, he is Shakti, light, energy, Chit. When we regard the sun as a great luminous body, we speak of him as the sun. When we regard it as shining on the whole earth, we speak of its light. And now his relation with the world is what is called omnipresence. This word, though used by every religionist, is not understood properly. Its true significance can only be understood when we understand what Advaitam means. It is in fact synonymous with it. Inasmuch as there are some who understand Advaitam as oneness, this word is used to mean that he is everything and that there could be nothing but him, and there is no second thing as mind or matter. And the simple logic by which this position is established is stated in the following sentence. Were we to exclude the omnipresent principle from one mathematical point of the universe, or from a particle of matter occupying any conceivable space, could we still regard it as infinite? What does this mean? Omnipresence means a space relation. It is capable of extension, measurement. It can be viewed as a mathematical quantity. If we suppose one unit of quantity occupies one unit of space, the omnipresent principle and matter being regarded in units of quantity, of course, it is impossible for one unit of God and one unit of matter to occupy one unit of space. This is mathematically and logically certain. But is this position tenable? Are we to regard God as occupying space, a quantity, a thing with length and breadth, i.e., capable of extension, i.e., as matter? But there are people who do so regard it, but they can't prove it by saying that God is omnipresent. Then the argument will be in this form. God is matter. Because God is omnipresent, and omnipresence means matter, which will be arguing in a vicious circle, there being really no major premise to this syllogism. Even the broad distinction drawn between mind and matter is that the matter is what is capable of extension, and mind is not. Can we therefore regard the universal mind as a thing capable of extension? Then what does this omnipresence mean and imply? And how is it God is omnipresent? And as observed before, omnipresence means a space relation. The notion of space is impossible apart from things coexisting. If we regard God as the absolute and the infinite, he could not be omnipresent. Infinite space is a contradiction in terms. Omnipresence therefore implies a coexisting object. If God is a principle diffusing and soaking through and through, it must diffuse and soak itself in another thing. If it fills, what does it fill? If it fills itself, then you must regard it as finite. As the Hindu Nyayikas put it, there could be no Vyapakam, omnipresence, all container, without things capable of vyapti, things filled. It is therefore established God is omnipresent, and his presence is felt in other things, and that God is not space, nor matter, nor the universe. Then how does he fill the universe? According to the text, it is by his Chit Shakti or Jnana Shakti. God is all Jnanam. He is Jnanamayam, and Jnanam is not space nor matter nor malam, and it is therefore possible to fill 1 unit of space with 1 unit of matter and one of Jnanam or God. He is then neither one with matter nor apart nor different from it. In this way he is omnipresent. It is his great Chaitanyam that fills his body, souls, and mala or matter. It is in us he dwells, and it is in this sense and sense alone that ye are the temple of God. Manika Vachaka. In the same way as our Shakti intelligence fills our body, so God's Shakti, Maha Chaitanyam, pervades our souls and lightens our darkness. And he is then truly our Father in heaven, whom we are cognizant within us, in our heart and spiritual consciousness. If otherwise we are God, how could God be itself cognizant of itself in its heart and spiritual consciousness? In fact, consciousness is a thing which cannot be predicated of the Absolute. Of course, we can hardly conceive how mind fills matter, and from want of the adequate idea, an inadequate word is used. Omnipresence is not at all the best word to be used to bring out the idea, and it is this improper use of the word which has caused all the mistake and confusion, as many an other word has done. The illustration takes a paradox. If he is all-pervading, he cannot be one, and if he is two, he cannot be all-pervading. All that is meant is, he cannot be regarded as a finite being, a thing capable of extension, etc. He is all in all, he is all and not all. Our intelligence and action is nothing when compared with his supreme jnanam. We are entirely subordinate to him. Therefore his supreme presence, every matter is nothing. It is like his property. It is in this sense our Thayamanavar exclaims, compare also the definition of pariparanam given in Ojjivaludakam. It has no origin, it is sat, it transcends all the 35 tattvas, it is unchangeable, achalam, it is the adishukshuma, the least of the least, as it is in everything and yet out of it. It could not be lessened nor increased. Akandaharam, infinite. It is immovable in relation with the universe, as the Akash is connected with air in perfect calm. Then this is Paripuranam, omnipresence. 3. The third sutra, on the existence of God. Sutra. It rejects every notion of the body as not being itself. It says my body, it is conscious of dreams, it exists in sleep without feeling, pleasure, or pain, or movements. It knows from others, this is the soul which exists in the body, formed as a machine from Maya. Commentary. This treats of Atma Prakasha and consists of 7 arguments. First argument. Churnika, an intelligent soul exists as its intelligence is exercised when it says, this is not the soul, this is not the soul. Vartikam, as there exists something after it rejects everything else as not being the soul, it is established that this something is the soul. Udarana, standing in intimate and inseparable connection with each and every part of the body and its organs, and intelligence of the form of Sri Panchachara is found to exist, which is not one or other of these, that thou art not Maya, with which thou art united, as it only enables thy understanding to shine better, as the eyeglasses make the eye see better. Thou art neither the Supreme Being, Tat Param, who is above thyself, and Maya. Thou art different from both. Second argument. Churnika. As the phrase my body is used in a separate possessive sense, there is a soul different from the body. Vartikam, as something exists apart when it says, this is my arm, this is my leg, as when it speaks of my town and my house, it is established that this something is the soul. Udarana, as thou speakest of thy wife and thy house as thine and as identical with thyself, so thou speakest of thy hands and thy feet and thy impression and sensation as though they are not different from thee. If examined deeply, thou wilt find the body, arms, etc. to be different from thyself. Third argument, Churnika. As he understands all the 5 different sensations, he is different from all the 5 senses which can only feel each a particular sensation. Vartikam, as among the five senses one cannot feel what another can feel, and as there exists something which feels all the five senses of sensations by means of all the five senses, it is established that this something is the soul. Udarana, if there is something which understands the actions of all the five senses in the body, which are moved by Sri Panchachara, and of which when experiencing the sensation, one sense does not feel what another sense feels, that something thou art. As these senses, except feeling each differently, have no thought that they feel, understand that thou art not one of them. Fourth argument. Churnika, as it passes from the dream condition into the waking state, there exists a soul different from the body in the dream condition. Vartikam, as something experiences in the waking state that it had dreams in sleep, it is established that this something is the soul. Udarana, when in sleep the senses which are alive in the body lose their action, and the body loses all its external actions, thou enterest another body, Shukshuma Sarira, inside thy own, in dream, and undergoest other experiences of sight, hearing, and the like, pleasure and pain, and the like, and then changest it for the visible body, Sthula Sarira. When waking, thou art not therefore the Shukshuma Sarira, thou art different. Fifth argument. Churnika, in profound sleep, though respiration is kept up, the soul is different from the respiratory organ, pranavayu. Vartikam, in profound sleep, when all the functions of the body except respiration are suppressed, feelings of pleasure and pain and movements are absent in the body, and in the waking state, when all the faculties are in working order, these feelings and movements are present. It is therefore established that something which thus suppresses the faculties or brings them into play, causing the absence or presence of the feelings and movements, is the soul. Udarana, in profound sleep, the body, which has cognition of the world, losing it, has no feeling of pleasure or pain, and no movements, though the breath, respiration, fully plays. Hence there is an intelligence which has such perception other than breath. Understand that when the soul is active in the body, it has such feelings and movements. Sixth argument. Churnika, the soul becomes conscious of one thing when it forgets another. Therefore the soul is different from Hara, whose consciousness is not subject to such change. Vartikam, as it can only understand when taught by its guru that it is different from God, whose understanding is perfect, it is established that this is the soul and not God. Udarana, when becoming conscious of objects, it only apprehends one at a time, and when proceeding to apprehend another, becomes unconscious of what it knew before, and when it undergoes the five avasthas, it becomes perfectly unconscious of everything. What is it which so apprehends? It is not intelligence, arivu. If the truth-seeker examines, it is the soul whose understanding becomes identical with what it becomes united to. The seventh argument. Churnika. The soul is different from all the various tattvas, as each is called by a separate name. Vartikam, it is established that the soul is different from the body, as each of the five senses, instead of being called soul, receives each a different name. Udarana, if the intelligence is the result of the conjunction of the bodily organs and senses, these, on examination, resolve themselves into the tattvas, which begin with kala and end with earth, and these are products of maya, which is not permanent, changeable, or destructible. If, after understanding attentively the nature of intelligence, this combination is examined, it is simply the body, sthula, and shukshuma, which is to the soul what the lamplight is to the eye. Hence the soul or intelligence is different from the body. Notes. This sutra is a remarkable example of condensation of thought and brevity of expression. This contains 7 arguments on a most important subject, and yet there is only a word or two to express each argument, and there are not more than 20 words in Tamil or 14 words in Sanskrit. The first sutra established, from the fact of the objective universe and its undergoing evolution, the existence of Sat. In the next sutra, the nature of Chit, by which this evolution is brought about, and which is all love, is explained. Now God need not be active and be all-loving. If nobody is to be benefited by it, he could not desire anything for himself, as he has no likes or dislikes. Every act of his must be construed as paraprayachanam, and not swaprayachanam. We have therefore to postulate a separate entity as soul, which requires the support of the Supreme Intelligence and love. This sutra therefore proceeds to the proof of its existence. 1. The first argument is directed against Sunyavadis, according to whom there is no Atma at all. The subject, though it identifies itself with every part of the objective body, organs, and sensations, yet it exercises its sense of difference and distinguishes itself from one and all of these. Therefore, that which so discriminates could not be a non-entity. This discriminating subject is the soul, or Atma. Even if we were to think we do not exist, the very thinking so proves the existence of the thinking beings. This illustration further enjoins a caution that this thinking intelligence, being no other than Atma, is not to be confounded with divine intelligence. When we see it is not Maya or objective consciousness, the Atma occupies a place different from the other two, i.e. a middle position. God is Sat, Maya is Asat, hence Atma is called Sadasat. The author of Ojiviladukam calls it Ali Arivu, hermaphrodite intelligence, comparing the divine Arivu to male and the Maya Arivu to female intelligence. Though all of these are intelligences, they are of different orders. There is a dependence of the lower intelligence on the higher, and when viewed from the standpoint of the higher, the lower ceases to exist, as it were. The latter becomes Asat, Maya is Sat, but as compared with Atma, it is Asat. Atma is Sat, but as compared with God is Asat. Maya could not be compared with anything lower, nor God Sat with anything higher. So these latter occupy extremes. Asat and Sat, and the middle one is called Sadasat, partaking of the nature of both and not being both. When it identifies itself with Maya, as in man, it is hardly distinguishable from Maya, and when it becomes identified with Sat, its presence cannot also be seen. So it is in Ali, hermaphrodite. One other distinction between Sat and Sadasat is that Sat is intelligence that induces perception, or light that removes darkness, and the latter is intelligence that perceives after the darkness is removed by Sat. The relation of God, Atma, and Maya is illustrated by the following analogy. Atma is the eye, which is affected by a general disability and a particular defect. It cannot see in darkness, nor when its eyesight is defective. God is the sun, the dispeller of darkness, thereby giving light to the eye and other objects and enabling it to perceive. Maya is like the eyeglasses which afford temporary relief to defective sight. By continued use of the glasses, births, and by a touch of the surgeon's lancet, God's grace, or Arul Shakti, the defective eyesight, Anavamala, may be permanently cured. But the defective eyesight could not be cured by the sun, however powerful it may shine, and it shines ever before and after the eyesight is cured, and yet at no moment could you compare the light of the eye to the light of the sun. The one is the dispeller of darkness, and the other is subject to darkness inherently. Sri Panchachara is synonymous with pranava. See further treatment of the subject in the subsequent chapters. 2. This is an argument gathered from a habit of speech to prove that the soul is different from the body, as against the Taganmavadis. The different forms of speech, I and mine, involve a difference between the non-ego body and the ego, and asserts the separate existence of the ego. Such usages as I am the body, I am the leg or arm, etc. are not in existence. 3. This argument is again regarding the soul as identical identical with the five external senses. Each sense stands apart and cannot feel a different class of sensations, so the soul can neither be one nor all of them. Even when the sensations are experienced, there is simply the feeling present and no thought of any such feeling. The eye sees, no doubt, but it does not think that it sees. This is, of course, the distinction between subjective thought and objective feeling. The objective feeling or object is not the subject mind or Atma. This argument is against the view that Shukshuma Sarira is itself the Atma. That it is not so is proved by the fact that the soul passing in the waking state into the Sthula Sarira, remembering its experiences in sleep, and remembering them not clearly even. In fact, it is in the Sthula Sarira all the faculties are present and in full play, and in the Shukshuma Sarira 10 of the tattvas, 5 elements, and 5 senses are wanting. In dream, there is merely reproduction of ideas as determined by the previous karma experiences, and without the command of reason or will. This sensorium and blind reproduction is not the subject. It can be so if in that condition the soul is in its full working order. Nor is the soul in its full working order and undergoing movements, feelings, etc. in dead sleep, and hence the respiratory organ is not the Atma. In Jagrata, respiratory function is working but in conjunction with other organs. External and internal senses and certain sequences follow feelings and actions. If the first is the sole cause or Atma, then we must eliminate other antecedents and see if the sequences still continue. In Shushupthi, the other antecedents are absent and the respiratory function is the sole function present, and it is not accompanied by the sequences. This is the inductive method of elimination of antecedents as causes which are not followed by the same effects. This same method is also used in the last argument. 6. The law of human consciousness as stated here is the same as that postulated by Dr. Bain. Change is essential to consciousness. Unless we change our thought to another, our consciousness of the thought ceases. To be conscious of the next, we must forget the present. So the Tamil axiom is stated, when we are conscious, we are also subject to forgetfulness. When we continue to think of a particular object or idea for a time and do not change it, we in fact do not continue conscious of it. Our mind becomes incapable of thinking, owing to its inherent weakness. Man's intelligence, therefore, is weak or changing, and it is this which distinguishes it from God, who is all intelligence, who is cognizant of all at the same time. One other distinction is human intelligence requires to be taught, improved, and developed. It is imperfect and needs the support of a perfect intelligence. This argument sums up all the previous arguments and points out one distinction between the bodily senses, Shukshuma, and Karma Sariras, which are all products of Maya and the soul. The distinction is that whereas these products of matter are ever changeable and changing, and hence called asat or false, the soul is unchangeable and hence called sat. This sat, however, becomes asat when in union with asat or Maya, and sat when in union with the true sat or God, and hence it is called sadasat. The definition of asat is given in the first vartika of the 6th sutra. It does not mean non-existent, but one perceivable in one aspect or objective attitude of the soul, and not perceivable in the subjective attitude of the soul. This finishes the chapter on proof. I have already pointed out that Maya, cosmic matter, and Anava, imperfection in nature, are taken as facts and not capable of further explanation or resolution into any other cause, and that matter undergoes evolution, and that there is some method in this, and this method is determined by karma, law of causation, and matter not being capable of evolution itself, and the individual ego not being able to determine determine the evolution, we require a superior force, a grand energy, and this is the unknowable. Its relation with mind and matter is Advaita, and its omnipresence is brought about by its Mahachaitanyam. The reason for separately postulating a soul is then shown, and this soul could not be confounded with Bhuvana and Bhoga, and is proved to be other than the body, the five senses, and Shukshuma Sarira and Karana Sarira. That is, it is different from Maya as well as from God. One group of phenomena, of faculties, have been omitted from the consideration of these questions, and that is the four internal senses, manas, buddhi, chitam, and ahankaram, and these four answer to the mind of the Western philosophers. These are also shown to be distinct from the soul, and as the subject requires a fuller treatment, it is discussed in a separate sutra. It will be seen from what follows that these occupy a middle position between the soul and the objective phenomena, thanu, external senses, and bhuvana and bhoga, and there is thus involved a triple division of man as soul, mind, and animal life, body. As between mind and body, body is object, asat, and mind is sat. As between the soul and the other two, the last two are objective, asat, and the soul subject, sat. As between God and the soul and the rest, God is the true subject, sat, and the soul and the rest are objective, asat. This relationship is discussed in the subsequent chapters and must be borne in mind. It is a point for the scientific inquirer to consider if the proof adduced in this chapter is sufficient and convincing, or if the statement is taken as a mere theory or hypothesis, and in these grand questions it is not possible to arrive at more than a true hypothesis. Whether it is a true hypothesis, i.e., whether it explains all the phenomena of human existence and satisfies all human aspiration, or whether it omits any facts unexplained and contradicts any facts of our existence. It is also a point worth notice that in the elucidation of these principles, nothing is made a matter of mystery, no real difficulty left unexplained by being consigned to the realms of the mysterious, and language is not used to puzzle man and baffle argument. When one proof is attempted, so far as the human mind is capable of grasping and proving these things, one must confine oneself to strictly human logical tests, and if the theory fails on the application of these tests, the theory must be condemned by human reason. If, after all, the trouble taken to postulate a theory, adduce proof, etc., a man is going to plead his own ignorance and God's mysterious ways, it would be far better for him to confess his ignorance at the beginning and attempt no explanation at all. Chapter 2, Lakshanavyal 2, 4th Sutra, of the soul in its relation to the Andakarana. Sutra. The soul is not one of the Andakaranas. It is not conscious when it is in conjunction with Anavamala. It becomes conscious only when it meets the Andakarana, just as a king understands through his ministers. The relation of the soul to the five avasthas is also similar. Commentary. This also treats of the nature of the soul, and it consists of 3 arguments. First argument, Churnika. The Andakarana have no activity except when in conjunction with the soul. Hence there is a soul distinct from the Andakarana. Vartikam. As the Andakaranas are only intelligent, chit, when viewed in relation to the subordinate tattvas, but are non-intelligent, achit, when viewed in relation to the soul, it is established that the soul is not one of the Andakaranas, namely manas, buddhi, chitam, and ahankaram. Udarana. A. Manas and other Andakaranas have perception of permanent sensations. The soul perceives the product of the perception by the buddhi after such mental perceptions. These perceptions by manas and buddhi reach the soul as the waves rising in the sea reach the shore. As the Andakaranas are different from the permanent sensations, so the soul is different from the Andakarana. B. While perceiving so, the soul as chitam considers as manas its doubts, as andakarana it wrongly concludes, as buddhi it determines properly. As it thus apprehends differently when it is united to each, it is different from them, just as the sun, though marking the divisions of time, is different from it. C. The letter A is the symbol of ahakaram, U that of buddhi, M that of manas, Vintu that of Chitam, and Natham, which is inseparable from all these letters, is the symbol of the soul. The five letters constitute pranava. When examined, consciousness arises when the soul and andakaras meet, just as the tides rise and fall during the conjunction of the sun and the moon. D. Ishvara and Sadashiva are the deities respectively of Vintu and Natham. Brahma, Vishnu, and Rudra are deities respectively of A, U, and M. Second argument, Churnika. The soul cannot see, being shrouded by the mala. Vartikam. It is established that the soul cannot understand when it is solely in conjunction with its inherent mala, anava, and this mala is something which darkens the soul's light or intelligence. Udarana, the soul will not know anything unless it receives the light through its body caused by Maya, as the eye apprehends objects by the light of the lamp. Anavamala exists in the soul eternally, becoming one with it and concealing its luster, as does the firewood conceal the heat or fire present in it. Third argument, Churnika, the soul undergoes 5 avashtas. Vartikam, as the soul is in a formless arupa tattva form and shrouded by the mala, it is established that the soul undergoes 5 avashtas, namely Jakra, Svapna, Shushupti, Thuriya, and Thuriyatita. Udarana, A. In the Jakravashta of the soul, when it is in the region of the forehead, it has 35 active organs, including the 10 external senses. In its Svapna Avashta, when in the region of the throat, it has 25 organs, excluding the 10 external organs. In the Shushupti Avashta, when in the region of the heart, it has 3 organs, including Chitam. In Thuriya Avashta, when in the region of the navel, it has only 2, namely Purusha and Pranavayu. In Thuriyatitha Avashta, when in the region of Muladhara, it is pure Purusha having none of these organs. B. The soul, when in Jakra Avashta, is in the region of the forehead, undergoes all the 5 avashtas in the same region. That is to say, it becomes conscious of each perception through each of the organs, and at the same time becomes separated from them. Shuta avashtas are like these 5 in numbers. Notes. Andakarana is a generic word signifying all the internal senses, but they more particularly mean, as here, manas, buddhi, chitta, and ahankara. The proof of the position that the soul is not one of the Andakarana is given in the Vartika and Udaranas. In dead sleep, Shushupti, when the internal senses are at rest, the soul is not conscious. It becomes conscious only when the Antakarana become once more active. When the soul is in Shushupti, it is in conjunction only with Anavamala and performing respiratory function. This last function is as the watchman who guards the innermost portals of the palace of the king, soul, when it is in perfect solitude. The avashtas are merely the conditions of the soul when it is in relation with all the external and internal senses, or with only some of them or none at all. 1. The Churnika furnishes the first proof, which is amplified in the Vartika. The internal senses are active. You lift your ego to its own place, as in yoga. The Andakarana become dead and inactive, thus showing that the Atma is not one of the Andakaranas. The distinction is drawn in the following manner. The Andakaranas are the faculties of perception and reason. They perceive and reason, but are not conscious that they perceive and reason. This latter function is performed by the true ego, Atma. The 4 Andakaranas are distinguished, among them wise Chitam, that takes an impression presented by the senses and considers what it is. It cannot know that it so considers. Manas takes such an impression and doubts whether it is or is not this or that. It cannot know that it so doubts. Ahankara ventures boldly that the impression is such and such. It cannot know that it so ventures. Buddhi determines properly that the impression is this or that. It cannot know that it so determines. A. The Andhakaranas are divided into two classes as remarked above. Manas, Chitta, and Ahankara are merely faculties of perception, and they perceive permanent sensations, and the language of the text is remarkable as exactly mean permanent sensations. Buddhi is the faculty of reason involving the sense of agreement and difference among such impressions. The product of this faculty is what is brought to the cognizance of the soul. The first three ministers merely gather statistics and prepare them. The chief minister, Buddhi, compares the statistics and draws his conclusions and formulates the proposition to the king, soul. As the waves are stirred by the winds, the senses affect the Andhakarana. B. Another distinction is that the four Andhakaranas are four different functions, one not capable of performing the function of another or all the rest. That which stands above, cognizant of all the four, is the soul. C. It was before observed that the soul was of the form of Sri Panchachara, and the latter was stated as synonymous with pranava. The symbol of Vinthu is a circle, and that of Natham is a line. These two, in fact, constitute the pranava symbol. The latter will be seen as the same as Pillai Shuli. No Tamil man will begin a smallest place of writing without prefixing Pillai Shuli. The significance being forgotten, it is thought of as a sectarian symbol, and the bigoted among Vaishnavas, to whom the pranava is as important, begin now to use another instead. Why it is called Pillai Shuli is because God Ganesha represents pure Sat, Brahm, and the elephant head is pranava, symbol, hence the popular Tamil couplet. The popular Sanskrit slokas in praise of Ganesha also describe him as pranava swarupi. The illustration contained in this stanza is a beautiful one. D. This contains another explanation of pranava. Shivam was first stated as true Sat or Brahm. I have shown that the form of Ganesha shows him to represent true Sat or Brahm. The very name of Subramanya signifies that he is true Brahm. The word Uma, meaning Shakti, is composed of U, M, and A, i.e. Om manifested. So these different words or mantras are different modes of expressing the same principle, the true Sat in symbol, sound, and language. So Om Sri Panchachara, Ganesha mantra, Subramanya mantra, and Devi mantra are mere equivalents and denote the Samashti Pranava when analyzed, i.e. regarded as Vyashti. It becomes divided into Natham, Vinthu, A, U, and M. A represents creation or origin, as its place is the place of origin of all sounds. U or U represents Sthiti, as when after pronouncing A, we bring it to a stand for an instant by converging the lips. U is formed when we close our mouths after pronouncing A and U. M is formed, and hence it represents Samharam. Binthu and Natham are the form and sound of these letters. This explains that man's intelligence only receives play and brightness and is capable of infinite improvement when brought in contact with the human body by getting frequent births. That is, by evolution alone man gets himself perfected. 3. I have not seen any objection to regarding the soul as a separate entity more formidable than this, vis-a-vis. If so, while I am in my objective state of consciousness, my ego is something existing as a real entity in the physical body itself. How is it possible to transfer the same to the astral body? Then again, it has also to be transferred to the Karana Sarira. We shall find a still greater difficulty in transferring this entity to the Logos itself, and you may depend upon it that unless a man's individuality or ego can be transferred to the Logos, immortality is only a name. This objection, which is stated with so much confidence, will, on examination, be found to be groundless. In the first place, it is not shown how it is not possible to effect the transference from one avashta to another under this theory, and that it is possible under the objector's theory. Besides, the difficulty is more in the language employed than in actual fact. And it is often in our experience what a fruitful source of error in the inadequate language we employ in describing laws of thought. The objector speaks of the transfer from one body to another on the premises already laid down in the preceding sutras, and on the view of the Avashtas as discussed in this argument, it will be apparent that there will be no transfer at all. The Atma does not fly from the Sthula Sarira into the Shukshuma or astral body, and leaving this into the Karana Sarira. It did not enter any new cosmic body at any one time. Its connection with Maya is eternal, and the law of mental evolution, or evolution of subjective consciousness, corresponds exactly to the evolution of objective consciousness. The human mind cannot evolve unless there is a corresponding evolution in its body. A pure disembodied mind, or Atma, is not recognized by this school. In the human as well as in the freed state, moksha, it is connected with matter, and between matter and God the Atma is supported like a piece of iron between two magnets, the one pulling it higher and the other pulling it lower, and in the human state the iron is in closest contact with the lower magnet, and in the moksha with the higher magnet. In moksha the power of Maya to undergo births alone is destroyed, by the karma having been eaten up, just as a seed of grain loses its power of germination in the granary of the ant by the sprout being nibbled off or by some other process. In human evolution, however, we find both the object and subject being evolved together, and there could be no evolution of the one without the evolution of the other. In its original condition, what is here called Thuriyatitha condition, the Atma is pure Purusha without consciousness of any sort, its body also being altogether undeveloped. This is the stage before evolution had commenced. The Atma has no consciousness, no intelligence, and no movements of any sort. In the next condition, Thuriya Avastha, evolution had been started. We have the first beginning of life, Purusha, in a living, breathing body, without consciousness or any manifestation of any other faculties. They, mind and body, are evolved a step further in the Shishupti Avashtu, and we have the first beginning of consciousness, and as such the faculty of Chittam is evolved in addition, and the objective body is then called Karana Sarira. A step further we arrive at Svapna Avastha, where all the faculties, objective consciousness, except the 10 external senses, jnana and karma indriyas, are fully developed, and the objective body is called shukshuma, or astral body. In the final stage of evolution, where man's consciousness has been fully developed, all the 36 tattvas formed of Maya have been also fully developed. This is the Jakravashta, and the body is the Sthula body. In this account of human evolution, there is no transference really. Similarly, when the Atma and its body undergo resolution, subjective and objective consciousness ceases little by little, or is drawn in, as it were, just as a spider or tortoise draws all its legs and organs into itself and rolls itself into a mass and becomes dead to all appearance. In fact, like a revolving prism of many sides, the attitude of the Atma alone changes, and this change of attitude, or avastha, is brought about, as, in the language of the text, it is in a formless arupa tattva form, and shrouded by mala, i.e., being made of matter but being chit itself and encased in matter. These 5 avashtas and their bodies are divided into 3 states, Kevala, Shakala, and Sutta. The Kevala state is the original state before evolution and described in the text of this sutra. It is not conscious when it is in conjunction with Anavamala. The Sakala state is described in the next sutra, 5, and in the next one, 6. The Sutta state is treated of. Having met a few of the most formidable objections taken to this view of the Siddhanta school, let me here state a few of the objections to the idealistic view, for which a rational answer is not yet forthcoming. Evolving logos and mula prakriti, matter, from Brahm, Sat, Why don't you apply the law of causation and conservation of energy and say otherwise, that Logos and matter are not Brahm? And why do you throw a veil between Logos and Brahm? And why do you say also that matter is not Sat but Asat? And why should the one energy, or Chaitanyam, or Shakti of the Logos, subdivide itself and form into different monads and acquire karma and become evil and corrupt and bring sin and sorrow into this earth? If Atma is not a particle of this Chit, but a mere reflection or shadow, how could a mere shadow become individualized and clothed with thought and action? And why should this shadow work out its own salvation? Will it not disappear when the substance is itself resolved? And in the same way as the Logos manifested itself in various bodies, as the sun in various pots of water, cannot the Logos itself gather up its lost energies? Or cannot the energy pass into the Logos as soon as the body dies, just as the sun's reflection ceases as soon as the water pot is broken? With what grace can the objection be stated that unless the man's individuality is transferred into the Logos itself, immortality is only a name, when for no reason or end the human monad is evolved from Logos, and when there is an equal chance for the individual attaining immortality to evolve again as a human monad? 5. The Fifth Sutra, on the relation of God, soul, and body. Sutra. The senses, while perceiving the object, cannot perceive themselves or the soul, and they are perceived by soul. Similarly, the soul, while perceiving, cannot perceive itself, while thinking cannot think thought and God. It is moved by the Arul Shakti of God, as the magnet moves the iron, while himself remains immovable or unchangeable. Commentary. This treats of the way in which God renders good or actuates the souls and consists of two arguments. First argument. Churnika, the tattvas act with the aid of the soul. Vartikam, it is established that the five senses perceive only as the instruments of the soul, as they can perceive nothing when not acting together with the soul. Udarana, the soul has regal sway over the five senses. These are not conscious of the soul and its sway, and the soul itself will have no consciousness except through the five senses. But if the soul itself is not active, the eye, though seeing, cannot see, and the ear, though hearing, cannot hear. Second argument. Churnika, the souls understand with the aid of hara. Vartikam, as the soul cannot perceive itself in the same way, the five senses cannot feel except with the aid of the soul. It is established that the soul also perceives with the aid of God. Udarana, A. Thou who hast even forgotten the text of the Veda, which says that the world, animate and inanimate, becomes developed in the presence of Shiva, understand that the soul knows the world only according to its karma with the light of Shiva. As all asat is shunya, he cannot experience asat. B. Just as the stars, which lose their individual light in the light of the sun, and yet do not become the sun itself, so the soul, receiving impressions from all the five senses with the aid of God, who is the only truth, becomes indistinguishable and inseparable from him, without becoming one or different from him. C. The Arul, or Isa, exists eternally with him. It is his Shakti. Without him, Shakti does not exist, and without Shakti, he cannot be. Hara and his Shakti appear as one to the Jnanis, and the sun and its light appear as one to the eye. Notes. The sutra points out the essential limitation of all human senses, faculties, and the soul. The power of each is limited to knowing or perceiving the lower one, and it cannot perceive itself or the higher faculty, and one faculty cannot perform the functions of another. The external and internal senses and the soul are therefore placed in an ascending order. Of these, the highest, the soul can only perceive and know what is subordinate to itself. It cannot know itself nor know God. It is on this analogy and for this reason that God is imperceivable by the human senses and inconceivable by the human mind or soul. And it will be seen further that the soul cannot see God at any time by its own powers, and that even the yogi sees nothing but a figment of his own brain. Not only are these human powers limited in their nature, but there exists an interdependence of the lower over the higher. In the last sutra, it is shown that the soul does not become conscious till the andakarana are evolved from matter, and it is here shown that the andakarana themselves will not act unless the soul influences them and act together, and that the andakarana have no independent action. And it is further seen that the higher consciousness exists or even predominates when the lower one ceases. That which stands therefore to the soul as the soul stands towards mind is God, perfect intelligence, supreme intelligence, or as described in the next sutra, Shiva Sat or Chit Sat. And herein consists the most important distinction between God and man, and which entitles this school of philosophers to call themselves Astika and all the rest theistic and atheistic Nastika. In the latter theistic schools, their ideal of God is a purely personal or human one, i.e. man raised to a god, or, as in the idealistic school, God is brought down to the level of man, in either of which cases the conception of God does not soar higher than that of man, and the true ideal of God is never reached. Coming to the distinction noted above, God and man do not differ in mere place or quantity or quality, or in degree of power, strength, or intelligence. It is not the same order of being differently merely in the amount of strength and intelligence. Man is not a particle of God, so that the requisite number of particles of human souls will make up one God. Put this, the idea is absurd enough, yet one finds thousands of people believing in the theory. The real difference is that God and man belong each to a different order or plane of existence. Just as we ascend from the plane of objective consciousness to the plane of subject or mental consciousness, and just as we ascend from the latter to the consciousness of true subject or soul, so also do we ascend from the latter consciousness to true Sat or God. The base of the lower rests upon the higher, but not as effect and cause. Such expressions as life of life, intelligence of intelligence, express the relation clearly, and yet we find these expressions freely used by idealistic philosophers without any meaning. According to the latter school, God will be an intelligence, and not an intelligence of intelligences. When Siddhantins use the expression all actions are God's actions, they are also misunderstood oftentimes, and the expression simply means that God is He who sustains our very being and actions as He vivifies our intelligence. Though there is dependence of the soul on God in respect to its Ichcha, will, Jnana, intelligence, and Kriya, action, yet the soul's self-action and responsibility is not destroyed. For instance, when I move my arm, not only is my volition and energy, Ichcha, and Kriya Shakti brought into play, but the same action is sustained by and is possible only in the presence of the supreme energy, Kriya Shakti, of God. When I think also, Jnana Shakti of God is also brought into play. Only when God works, He does not work as we do. As the first illustration to the second argument points out, His presence produces these effects, and even then He does not suffer any change as pointed out in the sutra. Analogous are these. All the actions of the human body are supported and aided in the end by the force of gravity, which is one and uniform, and yet in ordinary language we do not recognize its power, though a scientific account of all the causes must include it as well. Similarly, all our visual perceptions are aided by the sun's light, which is one and uniform. Yet I say merely, I see. Accordingly, the ignorant do not recognize and feel the power of the Lord, but the wise, recognizing this power, try to realize and feel it by withdrawing more and more from themselves and bringing themselves more and more into contact or rapport with Him, aided thereto by His Arul Shakti. And the last illustration appropriately discusses the nature of this Arul Shakti. The approximation of man to God results in the end and in Advaita relation, as described in the second illustration. In daylight, the light of the star is completely lost to all sight, and yet not lost. The light of the star blends with and becomes indistinguishable from the light of the sun. Its identity is lost and not itself. There is no annihilation of the soul, but its individuality or egoism is lost, its karma having been eaten. This is moksha or nirvana, according to the Shaiva Siddhantin. Then and then alone will its action, if it has any, be in reality that of the Lord. The subject is further discussed in the next sutra. The limitation of the human intelligence is thus described in Sivagnana Siddhi. The soul understands with the aid of the Supreme Intelligence as it understands through some sense or other, forgets what it has learnt, learns from others, is not conscious of itself, does not understand of itself. On the other hand, God is described as Svapara Praksham, he who is self-luminous and illumines others. On this subject, the same authority raises several other questions and gives beautiful replies. If God illumines all souls, he must illumine all of them equally well. If each one's intelligence follows his own karma, then no God is required. The answer is that karma itself acts through God, though God cannot change karma, and the analogies of the earth which yields according to the labor of the peasant, and the sun who can only ripen those fruits that are matured, are pointed out. The theory that the soul is self-luminous or self-intelligent is refuted by the fact that the soul is only conscious when in union with the senses, and the opponent is compared to a man who would say that a man with the full power of eyesight finds out objects by feeling with his hands. Man's intelligence is in fact analogous with his eyesight. He is not blind, non-intelligent, nor is his sight such as to make him see in the dark and dispense with the aid of the sun's light, God's grace. Sixth Sutra, on the nature of God and the world. Sutra. That which is perceived by the senses is asat, changeable. That which is not perceived do not exist. God is neither the one nor the other, and hence called Shiva Sat or Chit Sat by the wise, Chit or Shiva when not understood by the human intelligence, and Sat when perceived with divine wisdom. Commentary. This treats of the nature of Sat and Asat, and consists of two arguments. First argument. Churnika, everything that is perceived by the human understanding is liable to decay. Vartikam, as an object exists or does not exist according to one or other attitude of the soul, it is established that the object perceived by the human understanding is asat. Udarana, hear, O thou who art ignorant of the real nature of asat, all those who are perceived by the human faculties and senses will be found to be asat by him who has understood sat. O thou who art not asat, if similes are required to illustrate that the world is asat, they are the figures formed on the water, the dreams and the cloud car. They disappear before him, as does darkness before the sun. Second argument. Churnika, the being so arrived at that is not perceived by the soul is hara. Vartikam, all objects understood by us do not require a light to know them by, and all not so understood cannot be known even with a light. Hence that which is not included in these two, and which is beyond the ken of human powers, and is within its ken also, that is Shivam, that is Sat. Udarana. A. If the meaning of the expression that God is neither what can be proved and known by us, nor what cannot be known, is asked, he who has found the truth will say that he exists. He cannot be seen by the human understanding, as he will then become asat. He must be seen by the Arul Shakti of Shiva, who cannot be known by man. This Arul Shakti is his foot. B. The faculties by which the soul perceives are asat, therefore none of them can perceive the one. Even thou who so perceivest cannot understand him. If examined, what thou perceivest will be different from thee. He who has understood himself will perceive himself to be not different from him, as he merges his personality in him and understands through his arul. C. If God is capable of being meditated by man, he becomes asat. If he is regarded as a being beyond human meditation, he will be a mere fiction. If he is meditated as neither, he will be a non-entity. If he is meditated as an object of meditation, though he is beyond human meditation, this will be also a fiction. The param can only be meditated with the aid of his arul. Therefore, he is not a non-entity. D. To be known by the soul, he is not different from itself. As he is even present in the understanding, it cannot know him. As he in fact makes the soul see, its understanding cannot comprehend and point him out to the soul, just as the eye which the soul enables it to see and yet is one with it cannot see the soul. God is not one who can be pointed out as that. If so, not only will he be an object of knowledge, it will imply a jnatha who understands him as well. He is not different from the soul as an object of knowledge. He becomes one with the soul, pervading its understanding altogether. The soul so feeling itself is also Shivam. Notes: this sutra contains the true and only definition of God, and all other attributes of God follow from the two given here. The way in which these attributes are derived is thus. In the first place, God must either be an object of human knowledge, or he is not. If the first, everything that is perceived by us is liable to decay and change, and we cannot regard God as liable to change. Therefore God is beyond human perception, and hence called Shivam or Chit, pure intelligence. If it is not an object of knowledge, is it non-entity? Of course not, and hence he is Sat, that which subsists, the only truth. These two form the components of the word Satchitanantam, so freely applied to God in the Shaivite and Vedantic lore. This is our only definition of God, and it is seen that any definition of God must contain these elements, and the conception of God could not be simplified in any degree. Stated thus, very few religionists would quarrel with our definition of God, and yet how very few of the religions of the world, even those which charges others as polytheistic and idolatrous, have an ideal of God which conforms to this definition. Their traditions, beliefs, and methods of worship destroy this true idea. For instance, if our definition of God, that he is inconceivable by the human intelligence and imperceptible to human powers, is true, how are all those religions which believe in avatars, Christianity and Vaishnavism included, reconcilable with our definition? When God is born in the flesh, is he not a tangible thing, a thing to be seen by our eye, felt by our touch, and comprehended by our senses? How can we then call him indescribable and imperceivable? How can the author of evolution subject himself to the laws of evolution, birth, and death? Is it not therefore that our sage one and all declare that he is without birth and death? We challenged anybody to point out in the vast Puranic lore any story in which Shiva is said to have been born in the flesh, and the very stories which exist only serve to illustrate the difference between him and the so-called immortals, namely that Shiva cannot die and be born, and that all others are capable of births and deaths, as our poet says. And every Tamil student can recall to mind the popular stanza of Kalamigan in which he claims superiority to Vishnu, who is superior to God, as Shiva has no births. Vishnu's births are 10, and his own are innumerable. The Churnaka points out that all object and subject, mental phenomena, are liable to decay, not annihilation, but change. They so change from moment to moment, they are so evanescent that they may almost be said to have no existence at all, and these are therefore called asat. And to avoid further misconception, it is defined as that which exists or does not exist according to the objective or subjective attitude of the mind, bearing in mind, however, asat here includes all the phenomena of object and subject, both being objective to the soul. Asat, or Maya, therefore, does not mean non-existent, nor illusion, nor mithya. It simply means other than Sat, and this definition has to be borne in mind fully, as the confusion of its meaning alone has given birth to the tortuosities of the idealistic school. The latter school compares Asat to the imagined silver in the shell and the snake in a rope. That this is a false analogy without any meaning is easily shown. For the production of this illusory knowledge we must have previously possessed a knowledge of two realities, both the shell and silver, and the snake and the rope, and an imperfectly intelligent being who by either defective vision or distance or fear, etc., mistakes one thing for the other. The silver and snake in themselves realities are not in the shell and rope, respectively, but but in a defective mind. In the genesis of the Asat, what supplies the places of silver, shell, and defective mind must be shown. So far as the illusory knowledge of silver is concerned, we have traced it to a defective mind. If myself and my human consciousness, objective and subjective, is an illusion, who is the subject of this illusion? Inevitably God. Such a God is itself illusory, and he cannot be self-luminous and intelligent. The analogy gives us no sense whatever, and though the objection as stated here has often been pressed, yet we find no book meeting it, and we find the analogy repeated often enough, and even by intelligent men. The nature of Asat is further explained in the illustration, and the similes given are in themselves real experiences while they last, and the point of comparison is simply their evanescent and temporary character.